There's a pretty one, your eyes. Here it is. Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel and an epic Friday reads. Not in the sense of all the books I finished, because I didn't finish any, but in the amount of absolutely glorious personal news I am now at liberty to share with you. Are you sitting down? This is very exciting, and there's two parts to this news. Part one, which I've known about for several weeks, is that Kenji's flight from Tokyo to Saskatoon is now booked. He will be arriving in almost exactly a month, at the end of April. How fabulous is that? Now, his circumstances are up in the air in that his mom, who's been comatose for several months, is still comatose. And so we decided together, but it was his decision, to wait until the end of April, and if she was still hanging on, he would say his goodbyes and come then. So that's the plan that is in place. The only thing that, if she happens to die just before he gets on the plane, like the week, a few days before he gets on the plane, of course he's going to want to stay an extra 10 days or something to be there for the funeral, but otherwise he's coming. And in fact, he has to come pretty quick. I think it's May 15th or something is the deadline, the drop-dead deadline for him to enter Canada with those immigration papers. They expire completely. We would have to start all over if he didn't get into Canada by then. So he's coming. And I am absolutely overjoyed. He's not going to be in great shape when he gets here. He needs all my TLC, and Mom and I already have a strategy of exposing him to having him and I spend a lot of time with Mom's dog, Charlie, who's with me now, but he's ignoring me because he hates it when I'm on the computer, because Kenji's a real dog lover. And also, I have a 4-year-old grandniece, or is she 3? She's 4, I think. Ada, who Kenji has yet to meet, and he loves little kids too. Yeah, we've got a strategy to nurse him back to health, but he's got to do a Tokyo detox for the first month and just crash. But he's going to be mentally exhausted and emotionally exhausted. But he's coming. It's been so long. By the time he arrives, it will have been 1 month short of 3 years that we've been apart since I left Tokyo. So it's going to be like starting over. And maybe that's a good thing. I hope it's not a bad thing. We shall see, but I'm very pumped for his fairly imminent arrival. I've been sitting on that news for a while. I wanted to wait until we got closer to the date. And in fact, I was planning to just spring it as a surprise once he'd shown up and do a little video with him. And I do still plan to do a little video with him when he arrives. But I was going to just spring it on you because you know how much I love surprises. But the other piece of news, it would have been weird to share the second piece of news without telling you the first piece of news. So the second piece of news is, and I'm using the pronoun I extremely loosely in this sentence, but in the past week or so, I bought a house. I bought a townhouse. I'm moving in early April into a 3-story basement, first floor, second floor, 3-bedroom townhouse in Saskatoon, and that is where Kenji and I will live. And when I say I, of course, anybody that knows anything about me and my financial situation and my wonderful mom knows it's really her. What a wonderful mom I have, and she's getting us set up, and I am just so excited. And I wanted a townhouse because it has a basement. And I certainly would have accepted an unfinished basement for storage, but this one is a finished basement, which is what I really wanted. So the basement space is going to be my library. And I hope Mom's not watching this. And in fact, I'm actually hoping Kenji isn't watching this either, because I will now have the capacity to grow my library exponentially into infinity. There is so much space. Like I say, 3 bedrooms, 2 people sharing a bedroom, got lots of space. Oh, I'm so excited. And it's in a great area. It's not too far from here, but it's more suburban, fairly close to where Mom lives. But the selling point of the location is the grocery store, the supermarket, and the liquor store, 4-minute walk from my house. So that is just amazing. Because where I live now, it's about a 15-minute walk to the grocery store, a little bit closer to the liquor store. And on a hot summer day or on a brutally cold winter day, it's too far to walk. So this is going to just be grand. Can you tell I'm excited? Do I seem excited? I sure the hell am. Delighted to start this Friday Reads with my 2-parter news bulletin. All right. So that is that. I just saw headlines that there was a screaming match in front of the TV cameras. I can't wait to watch, but I didn't want to get sidetracked by that, so I'm going to watch it, and I hope Zelensky put them in their place. I hereby vote for America to be kicked out of NATO and Zelensky to be admitted, and he should become the leader of the free world. Abso-fucking-lutely. Enough about that, but it sounds delicious. I saw about a 10-second bit of footage where Trump said, "You're not acting very grateful. I don't like that." What a whack job. Anyway, there. Without further ado, another wonderful mystery guest. Please meet this person.
And this week's mystery guest is the Canadian novelist, joining us from Calgary, Marion Douglas. Hello, Marion. How lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Sean.
We've had a really interesting correspondence setting this interview up, and I don't know where I've been. I do know where I've been. I was outside the country for several years until about 2.5 years ago that I'd never come across anything about you or by you. And your most recent novel, which came out last year, 2024, is this gorgeous, The Game of Giants. And it sounds absolutely fascinating. I don't pay too much attention to blurbs, but I did note that you got a great blurb from none other than Emma Donoghue, who said, "Marion Douglas is the queen of small-town strangeness, a gripping, moving, darkly hilarious web of lives." Anything you'd care to add to that, Marion?
I think she was in that blurb was actually referring to my previous novel, so but it also applies, I hope, to The Game of Giants. I do try to inject a certain amount of humor into my writing, so that's definitely relevant to The Game of Giants. Essentially about a mother. I wanted to write about a mother who is primarily a person first and maybe a mother second. The story itself starts out in Ontario, and Rose, moves to Calgary, a little bit imitating my own life in that way, although it's not autobiographical in any way. Then she moves to Calgary, discovers she's pregnant. She had been married to a man named George Drury, discovers she's pregnant, and moves into a house. Next door neighbor is Lucy, a character named Lucy Strike, and these two fall in love and become the parents of Roger, the child who's born. And Roger turns out to have some developmental differences. He's a little bit delayed. So overall, the story, and I think it's reflected in the cover, is about belonging in the community. And when you look at the cover closely, it is a community, but there's something a little bit maybe sinister about the way the community looks. There are buildings that look like institutions and buildings that look like dwellings. And the main conflict in the book arises from Rose and Lucy's approach to the institutions that Roger has to contend with as he is diagnosed and moves through the first 3 to 4 years of his life.
So those issues, those problems started to emerge early.
Yes.
I want to hear more about that. First question. Is the novel literally set in Calgary, or is it in a place that's only in your imagination?
Oh, no, it is literally set in Calgary.
Okay.
So there are references to thinly disguised names of neighborhoods, and actually there are some actual places that are represented, like the University of Calgary and 16th Avenue and Memorial Drive and the Bow River, etc.
We've all come, Canada and everywhere, probably even Calgary has come a long way, but Alberta is not known as the bastion of the LGBT positive social atmosphere. So is that an issue that this lesbian couple face in the novel?
Yes, it is. It's a little bit secondary, but it is a subplot, especially since this novel is set mainly in the early 80s. I do use some of my own life experiences in that because I was in a lesbian relationship living with a woman during the early 80s, and I also had 2 children, and they certainly experienced some negative feedback from the community knowing about my situation. And the community also knows, of course, about Rose and Lucy's situation. And Lucy is much more ouch than Rose is. And this is another source of anxiety for Rose. Rose has a lot of anxiety about Roger, but she also has some anxiety about the relationship with Lucy. And that is brutally communicated to her in one scene, which is a Christmas concert at the school where Roger is in preschool, where one of the kids who's a bit older than Roger comes up to Rose and Lucy at the little social event after the Christmas concert and says to Rose, "Does Roger look the way he looks because you have AIDS?" Just a confused mix up of things that someone might think from hearing parents talk about this couple, this lesbian couple with this unusual child.
Just before I move off that topic, just a few thoughts on how Calgary has changed in your
Okay.
eyes since the 80s.
Since the early 80s, I think it's changed a lot. It's very common now to see very openly gay couples out on the street. And I do think, despite Alberta's reputation, Calgary is a pretty liberal leaning city. I'm worried more about what's going on south of the border.
I'm worried about the border disappearing.
Yes, that's true. The imaginary
God.
line.
Let's hold off. We won't be able to get through this entire conversation, I'm sure, without talking about all that nonsense, that dangerous nonsense. What intrigues me about the synopsis is that Rose, she is a developmental psychologist. And so she's experiencing this as a mother, something that she works with every day, and that it's not so easy when you're the mother. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I did actually work myself for the Calgary Board of Education for 26 years as an educational psychologist. And that was another motivation for writing this book. I wanted to share some of the anxieties that many of the mothers I met over the years shared with me, because I worked pretty much exclusively with children and families who had kids with developmental differences. I saw how much of a toll that took on mothers, especially parents. And I saw recurring themes like mothers maybe blaming themselves, mothers looking back at things that happened maybe during their pregnancies or during the child's early life. They could perhaps attribute the child's problem to, or problems that they were having with extended family about not accepting the child. And so I brought a lot of that to Rosa's character, because a lot of her response to Roger is not all that adaptive, despite her being in school and learning to be a school psychologist and becoming a school psychologist. She's kind of into a fight or flight mode throughout a lot of the story. And she puts off things. The doctor tells her to put him in daycare, and she wants to just keep him sheltered at home. And she has a bad experience at the first little swimming lesson she takes him to when he's about 15 months old, and she doesn't go back. And she doesn't want to put him in preschool. She basically wants to just shelter him from what she sees as this very unwelcoming world that she knows about from working in school systems where largely kids who are different are somewhat segregated. So she's in a little fight or flight thing, which also extends to her rather irrational, emotional affair she has with a man she meets at the gym, where she's, I think, also contemplating life's going to be hard enough having a child with a developmental disability. Maybe I should switch over to the other team. And that doesn't go anywhere. Anyway, it just all adds to the drama that, that is
And
going
so
on.
that anticipates my next question. I think I have maybe two more questions about the novel.
Okay.
Is it's described as being a humorous novel, and the outlines of the story that telling us about seem quite serious. So how did you manage to weave humor into it?
I think it's just maybe the voice of Rose, like it's narrated by Rose. So she does. She's making fun of herself throughout the story as well. She realizes a lot of what she's doing is ridiculous. And so she's reflecting on that. And she's also reflecting on a lot of what's going on around her and seeing some of that as being absurd as well. Lucy's character is a moderating influence. Lucy is quite optimistic and firm in her desire to support Roger no matter what and make this whole thing work. So she's the voice of reason and maybe maturity throughout the story as well. But she's a bit
Great.
funny. She has her funny moments as well. She's got a little project underway where she has a not very exciting job as a receptionist in an optometric office, but she's got a little side gig where she's writing a column for the community newsletter, and it's called One Thing. And she goes out and interviews people, just randomly, people in the neighborhood she runs into, and solicits their thoughts on one thing that's maybe on their minds. And she doesn't really necessarily want opinions. She maybe just wants observations. This column gets picked up by the Calgary Herald. So she becomes a little bit famous in her own right. And that's another little bit of a subplot.
Sounds interesting. Now, my last question on the novel, I think, is maybe two more questions. But so the penultimate question is, how far does the storyline go? Is it over the course of a summer, a year, 5 years?
It is approximately 5 or 6 years, mainly because when Roger undergoes his developmental assessment, that's Roger, the child, she starts thinking back on events in her childhood and her high school years. So there's a bit of that sort of late 60s, early 70s. But the main story really takes place between, say, 1978 and 1984. So Roger is about 4 when the story concludes, and we're up to 1984 then.
This is screaming movie deal to me, Marion.
Thank you, Sean. I would scream that to someone else.
It sounds like it'd be the great premise for a movie. I am intrigued by the title, but don't explain it if it's a spoiler.
It's not a spoiler, but the reader doesn't find out until towards the end of it. When Roger is in preschool, Roger's got some very adorable quirks, and one of them is he's quite obsessed with watches and timepieces in general. And another is that he really likes words with O sounds. When he starts preschool, one of the other boys in the preschool, his name is Ryan O'Hanrahan. So Roger immediately falls in love with Ryan O'Hanrahan because of this O in his name. One day, Roger disappears. He's missing in action. And it turns out, after about a 3 or 4 hour frantic search and sort of miscommunications, that Roger followed Ryan O'Hanrahan home one day and was at Ryan's house. They were upstairs, and Dad hadn't noticed them come home. They were upstairs playing a game in Ryan's room. And the game was called the Game of Giants, and it had to do with standing above Ryan's model train set and pretending that they were giants, and that they had to hide from the adults because if the adults found them, the adults would be so afraid of them, they would try to put them in a zoo. And Ryan had a little hiding space in his, I don't know if you've ever been in older houses that have eaves where you can, if there's a little door, you can get into these eaves, and that's where Roger was hiding some of the time. So eventually, of course, he's found and all is well. The Game of Giants refers to the fact that Roger is a little giant in his own way. And by that time, he's finding his own way, stepping out in the world on his own, even though it's creating a bit of panic for everyone around him.
This is your 4th novel, and I believe that you're busy at work on your 5th. Tell us what you're working on now, Mary.
I'm working on a novel, no title yet, but I've become interested in the idea of what makes some people charismatic and what is it in some people's personalities that others will follow and become almost enamored of such individuals. So the central character is going to be a man actually named Foster, who more or less starts his own church following. And what happens with this situation? There will be a lesbian couple in this story. The lesbian couple will be named Ruth and Wendy. And it is going to be set in Southern Ontario, in the land where I grew up, on the shores of Lake Huron. Not really sure how it's all going to turn out, but there will be a few subplots and more characters than in the Game of Giants.
Extrapolating from that comment, I'm just going to take a wild guess that you write to find out how the story ends.
I definitely, yeah, I feel like there's some idea in there that wants to come out, and I just start writing. And so I might wind up with something quite different by the end, but that's what's motivating me right now. Also, what is it that makes people in some way narcissistic, but not in a bad way, but in a kind of charming way? How that all happens and how people fall into their web and what that looks like.
That sounds really great. And I see you've got a bunch of books behind you as well. I think you have a few to recommend for us today. What have you got to recommend?
Yes, I do actually have a couple. I was going to mention another Calgary author named Mikka Jacobsen. She published, or Freehand, the same publisher who published The Game of Giants, published a book of essays by her, I think last year, and it's called Modern Fables. And I loved it. I was trying to think of one word to describe the writing, and the word I chose was incisive.
Incisive.
Yes, incisive. And one of the things for me that I really liked about this book is Micah talks, some of the essays are autobiographical and some are more about literary observations, but she talks about growing up kind of middle class. And I find that this is an experience that's often overlooked. Like we see the working class or lower middle class represented a lot, and we see the kind of upper middle, more privileged classes represented a lot, but the whole business of being in that middle class and not really knowing where you belong, whether you belong with kids who are maybe, I don't know what, more rough and tumble, or you don't belong with the ski club, that kind of thing. She reflects on that a lot. And I identified with that because I feel like I've always been in that middle place too. She says, I just wanted to, well here one thing where she says, despite the fact that I had a university degree, I basically always connected with the riffraff. That really rang true for me, or I felt like when I was growing up, I don't belong with this group. I belong with this group here. So there's that. She has another book coming out actually right now called Good Victory, which is short stories, not essays. I also wanted to recommend a book by Margaret Macpherson called Tilting Towards Joy. She wrote, I think her last book was Tracking the Caribou Queen. It was about, she grew up in Yellowknife. I really liked that book. And so this book is short stories. They're interconnected. Some are set in France and some are set in Canada. And it's a group of characters at different stages in their lives. And from the title, Tilting Towards Joy, you might infer that in each story, there's a moment of great transcendent joy, but that's not the case at all. In each story, there's a little moment where maybe two people connect just through a moment of eye contact or a moment of paying attention to the same thing at the same time. And I really like that, like the subtlety of what she considers joy and ways that we can find joy and connection in little moments in real life, not on our phones.
I was at her Saskatoon book launches, both for Tracking the Caribou Queen and Tilting Towards Joy. And I have interviewed her on my channel a couple times.
Oh, good. Really? Yeah.
About the Caribou Queen, especially a long form chat. Yeah, she's an important writer in my world, so that's wonderful.
Yes,
I haven't had Tilting yet, and you have, so I appreciate the.
Yeah, I highly recommend. It's great.
That's great. Last question. I love the work of art on your wall. It looks like prairies. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yes, that is actually by an Ontario artist. I've lived in Calgary since 1986, but I did go back to Ontario from 2015 to 2019 because my dad had dementia, and I was living south of Owen Sound in Hanover, Ontario, which I believe is Grey County. Then I met this
I'm-
artist. Okay, yes. Her name is Janet Main, and she is an Southern Ontario artist. And during the COVID epidemic, I actually bought that from her and actually bought a couple of other pieces from her too. But she spent some time in the prairies, and obviously that inspired that piece. Yeah, Janet Main.
Marion, this has been a wonderful chat. Thanks for your time, and I'm looking forward to reading The Game of Giants. And if you're interested, I'd love to have you come back and chat at length about the novel once I've
Okay.
read it.
Sure, I would love that. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
It's been fun being a mystery guest.
So yes, The Game of Giants. It sounds really interesting. Looking forward to getting to it. It's a chunky one. It's 340 pages, so yeah, not a shorty. All right, I've also been extraordinarily busy on BookTube this week, in that I got 2 big videos out. One is my feature interview, is that the right word? Long-form chat with Orla Owen, the author of Christ on a Bike, which, as I said at the beginning of that video, is now longlisted for the Dublin Literary Award, which I misnamed. I think I called it something different, the Dublin Prize. I am really bad with that kind of nomenclature. Anyway, we had a lovely chat. It's up on my channel. Please check it out. And I wish Orla and Christ on a Bike all the best. As the long list, which has about 8,000 books on it, is whittled down to the short list. And there's another screw up, and I am so embarrassed. I'm North American, so I'm going to plead my exemption, my privilege? No, just my idiocy as a North American about geographical nomenclature, because it's a very sensitive topic. See, I don't even know what there is no overarching term that would include the Republic of Ireland, is there? And I described her as a British writer, and she corrected me during the interview. And then when I did my separate little intro for it, I still said British. I'm an idiot. She lives in London, but she's Irish, and that is a faux pas that I need to get out of my system, because I keep saying that, and people in the Republic of Ireland, or from the Republic of Ireland, don't take kindly to being described as British. Sean, wake up. Anyway, it's a wonderful chat. Do check it out. And then late last night, and I really wanted to get it published on my channel before the end of February, I did a secret vlog for Black History Month, because I couldn't fit in a whole book with all the reading commitments I had already. So I thought maybe I could read at least one short book and then dabble in a bunch of others. And that's basically what happened. And that's the vlog that went up. It was really not just fun. Fun is really the wrong word. It enriched my soul and just made me realize once again how much fantastic Black literature and history is out there for me to read. Check it out. I only finished one standalone volume. I'll be getting to that later in the broadcast. I'm saying broadcast now without even putting air quotes around it. But it was a really fabulous experience. Do check that out. And if I can say mysteriously, this is not a video that you want to skip around in or stop watching prematurely, he said mysteriously. All right. So I had those 2 videos go up, and I have had a great reading week. I haven't finished anything other than the one standalone volume, in air quotes, volume, and I'll tell you about that right now, and then I'm going to start a bunch of books. It's kind of scary, since I haven't finished any. Okay, this is the Chapbook, which is a standalone short story by a Black Canadian writer that I read from cover to cover, and that is A Winter or a Town Near Palgrave by André, Alexis. And I love this story. I talk about it in some detail on the vlog. It was a little chapbook printed for Independent Bookstore Day in 2022, and each copy is signed. Lindy has been nudging me. The nudge is a bit of a euphemism to finally read some André Alexis. And this is the first thing I've read, and I loved it. It was a challenging read for me because it goes a little bit, I don't want to say woo-woo because that's a negative word, but if you're not sure where you are, in what dimension you are, it's a bit, I don't know if speculative is the right word, but you feel like you're outside of realism in fiction, and it was still an emotionally engaging and very profound read. It's autofiction. The protagonist's name is the author's name, and he hears about this really great town, and he goes to visit with a friend, and he's really entranced by it. And one of the things Lindy pointed out, after Lindy watched my vlog, she pulled this off her shelf and read it. She hadn't gotten around to reading it. And she quoted a line from it about the narrator realizing that everybody looked younger than their years, even the infants. There was something going on in this town that's mysterious in an intriguing and appealing way. And so he decides to take over a short-term job that is also mysterious, and they don't really tell him all the details of what he's getting himself into. And you have to read the story, but it is a really profound meditation on what makes community. What does it mean to be a carer in society in a small town, and inspiration, creativity, and the blocks there too. I thought it was just luscious, and that is what I finished this week, and that I definitely will be getting to a full-length book by André, Alexis, sooner rather than later. I said a minute ago that it was scary that I was going to be starting a bunch of new books when I haven't finished anything, but actually 2 of them I will be starting later this week once I finish 2 books, so it's not as scary as I made it sound at first. I am just a few chapters short of finishing up this David Carpenter mystery, Luck. Really enjoying it. I'll be wrapping that up, giving you my wrap-up thoughts on that next week. And I'm reading that to Mary Jean. And we have been reading the Emma M. Lyon series, the Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon. Together, I've been reading them to her by Beth Brower. And here is Volume 4, which we will be starting immediately after Luck is finished. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm happy that I thought to recommend this series to Kate of the Fabulous Book Podcast, the Book Club Review podcast, because I wanted somebody who's British. I know I can comfortably use the word British for this context, to opine on this, because this is by an American author. I don't know anything about her background, but it all rings culturally authentic to me, set in the 1880s in London. But what would a bona fide British reader think? And Kate started reading it that night. She's way past me. She's binge reading them and recommending them all over the internet, so I'm really pleased. Also, in the next couple nights, I will finish reading Babacombs by Susan Scarlett to my mom. We're both absolutely loving it. Once that's finished, this is going to be a bit of an experiment, but there's one on my shelf that I've been curious about that I thought, let's try this one with Mum. This is a Scottish novel. The author grew up in Glasgow. It's set in 1920s England and 1960s Scotland, and it's based on an autobiographical experience in the author's family tree. It is called After Nora by Penelope Curtis. When I ordered the copy through, I think, Bell Ackwell's, it came with this lovely bookmark. The autobiographical thing is the author, Penelope Curtis's father, who had an adulterous relationship with a woman named Maria de Sousa. And the other part is about his mother, Nora, who is the author's grandmother. And it is that kind of a work of genealogical fiction, maybe we should say. Anyway, it sounds great, but there's a lot of characters and jumping around in time and so on. We'll see how it goes reading it to Mum. There's also some photographs in it. I'm very eager to try it, and Mum's certainly willing to try it, so we'll see how it goes. And finally, March is just around the corner. It's just like tomorrow. Lord. I was a little busy in February. Now you know why I haven't gotten much reading done. Been happily busy signing documents and looking at houses and all that fun stuff. But for the Irish Reading Month, the Irish Readathon, which I assume is still happening. I haven't seen any videos, but I'm assuming it is. Doesn't matter. I'm still planning to read Irish in March. I would love to read Welsh too, but I don't have time. I just don't literally this month. I'm packing up all these books and all that stuff. But I am doing a pseudo-buddy read with Robin, who is a big friend of this channel and a big supporter of me on Patreon. And she and I chose, as one of her Patreon benefits at that top level, you get to do 2 buddy reads a year with me. And so we've chosen this one, William Trevor, The Story of Lucy Gault, which I remember Bob the Booker raved about, and it's been on my radar ever since. And I'm pretty sure Brian Bookish loved it, and I have enjoyed almost everything I've read by William Trevor. So I'm looking forward to Robin and I are going to have our pseudo-buddy read Zoom chat about that in the middle of March. It opens in the summer of 1921, and the titular protagonist is 8 years old, and her family is being forced out of their community, maybe even out of their country. Well, that sounds pretty darn interesting. Was that a Friday Reads full of fabulous stuff, or was it not? Thanks for watching.